Roxana.
And I'm Arturo. And this is our video. So we interviewed Professor Almaguer. He is the former Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies and also teaches at various departments here at SF State. Yeah, so
Hope you enjoy.
Here's our video.
I'm Tomas Almaguer. I'm a professor of ethnic studies. I teach for a variety of departments, including Latino studies, as well as history, sociology, women gender studies, you name it. Okay. 6 different departments.
When were you born and where?
It's a great mystery of life. I was actually born in Ventura, California. I'm from Southern California. And I was born after the war, 1948, actually.
So you're one of the
baby boomers.
Exactly, from that early phase of that moment.
Okay, and how was your early childhood growing up in Ventura?
Oh, it's...
Especially in the 40s.
Yeah, it's fucking a mess, you know? I'm from a totally dysfunctional, working class Mexican family. And alcohol, abuse, no education. Yeah, so I absolutely am cut from a basic cloth that many Mexicans from my generation, were spawned from and stuff. And so, yeah, it was not an easy situation. I'm the oldest of 9. My mom's the oldest of 13. My dad, the youngest of 11. And I'm the only one in my family of 9 that ever went to college. The only one that got a PhD from Berkeley.
And how many siblings do you have?
8.
Oh, there's 8. Okay.
There's 5 brothers and 4 sisters, or 3 sisters.
And you talked about a lot of the things that are going on in Ventura, like alcoholism and all that. Was that stuff that you personally went through with your family?
Of course. Yeah. No, I mean, so, my parents never went to high school. They met in the agriculture industry. My mom was working in a packing house in Oxnard. My dad was a truck driver delivering produce. And they met. That was the limited world in which they lived. My mom spent most of her life, pregnant and raising, 8 kids, 9 of us actually. And my dad, truck driver, construction worker, very little, opportunities for them.
Yeah.
And it was a really tough life, I have to say. My dad was an alcoholic, abused my mom, beat her ruthlessly, lots of violence within the family, lots of jailings, lots of welfare. I mean, so people would look at me and think I'm, this kind of Calvin Klein or, Chicano or Nordstrom Chicano or something, and assume that I'm just this middle class, schoolboy.
Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
And I carry those scars with me.
Yeah.
And I get, as one of your colleagues, and I get very snarly with students when I think they're abusing the privileges, the prerogatives that they have now, that they've gained, that some of us helped to spawn and make possible. And so I have very little patience for students and their dramas and traumas and silliness because of those hard knocks, I think. Yeah.
So you said you were the only one that went to college. So was education even a priority in your household, or was it just straight to work?
Oh, it was just straight to work. I mean, in high school I worked at a little mom and pop grocery store. The good news for me was that I had steady employment when my dad was in jail, and eventually learned a trade. I mean, I learned how to do things in a grocery store, including meat cutting, and then my brothers took over after I went to community college, and so it really provided a bit of a little bit safety net and all, but it was a very difficult childhood. And the reason I did well, I think, is that I found refuge in academic work. I was able to do it, I think my brothers and sisters could have, but they didn't have the same kind of drive, I guess, perseverance to do it, and I did. And I did it well. I did it well. I also did crime really well, so I had two paths when I got out of high school. Went to college. I had 3 felony arrests before I went to college. And it was unclear, whether I was going to be a career in crime or a career in academia. And academia just seemed to be a little less painful a path. And so
You had 3 prior arrests. If you don't mind, what were they?
3 felonies for burglary, for drugs, and I was actually convicted of attempted bombing of a police car. Yeah, I was a bit of a Disneyland revolutionary. So when I see all the little revolutionaries and all the little activists, I kept thinking like, yeah, okay, right, you're the first one that's ever done this. Give me a break. So I am cynical, pessimistic because of all of these experiences. But the only person that I know that went to graduate school at Berkeley reporting to a probation officer.
Yeah. And were these crimes committed because of just the wrong crowd, or was this you just activism?
Oh, no. I'm just really good at what I do. And and I just happened to have got my ass ensnared in some situations, but I skated on most of them, But yeah, I mean, I have if I really stop to think about it, I have a pretty colorful life, and not cut from the same cloth as most of the people on this campus. Maybe closer to some than in other places where I've taught, like Berkeley or Michigan. But yeah, I think I've embarked on a pretty careful path, not one that a lot of people have fallen prey to,
Yeah.
What else can I tell you? I'll tell you anything you want.
So I guess you had a very interesting childhood, to say the least. What drove you to acquire a PhD?
It was easier than working for me. I had a drive and a tenacity to give back very early on. And part of what I wanted to do in going to grad school was to write about what I knew, and that was where I was from. And it was Ventura County and that small little world. And I had enough ability to realize that that small little world was part of a much broader world and historical moment. And that actually led to a dissertation that looked at Ventura County, and then it became a book, Racial Fault Lines, that one of my claims to fame in the academy. And that was my way of understanding where I was from, making sense of the world that I knew all around me, and making sense of my family's kind of place in some larger historical drama that brought us here, that put our family to work, and that took us in a variety of directions. And so, as a sociologist in training, I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give back. And when I did that, it seemed that the easiest pathway for me to proceed was to continue to do that kind of work. And I went into the academy. So I went to Berkeley because I lost the fellowship to go to Santa Barbara because of my arrest. And Berkeley gave me the money, and I went to school there. Did incredibly well. I'd like to think that I have kind of given back to my community and where I'm from for the last 40 years. That's what I do. That's why I'm here.
And you talked about your book, Fault Lines,
Yeah.
and also you wanted to give back and just try to understand like your family life and just try to understand all these things that were just going on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the world of academia doesn't necessarily help educate the Latino experience at that time?
Well, at that time there was very little work. I mean, very little history books, for example. We were reading Carrie McWilliams' North from Mexico, very old book. This book by Rivera, I forget the title of it, I think it's called, I forget the title actually, I'm trying to think of it, Meyer and Rivera. But anyway, there was not a lot of history, and so moving into what became Latino studies, Chicano studies, part of our obligation was to produce that history. It wasn't there. And so a lot of us, even who were not historians, did historical work, to excavate and document that kind of history. And so, the creation of knowledge and critical understanding of Latino experience is what I've been all about. And I've done it historically in terms of that kind of work. I do stuff on gender and sexuality now that's very contemporary. And I see that work also as a part of trying to understand the incredible diversity of the Latino experience, in this case Mexicans, and from the world that I know best.
And so now you also do work in gender studies as well too. Is there, or has there always been a correlation of gender studies amongst the Latino community back in your day?
Well, no. I mean, in the beginning, it was an attempt to excavate a historical narrative, and as I used to say back then, it was his story. It was history. It was men's stories. Great men, great activists, great wars, great events, and because Latinos had kind of been excluded from the academy, and many of the first people entering were men. That became kind of the part of their work and that worldview. Understandable, and it had its problems clearly, and I think that women's issues, were very quickly brought onto the table by the Latinos and Chicanos in this case that were in the academy at the same time, and so those works developed kind of in tandem and in parallel, but it was never easy. I think for women's issues, gay issues, issues of diversity in terms of multiplicity of genders and sexual expressions. No, that was not part of the program. Part of the program was to document how historical our struggle had been, how we had resisted, and how we were oppressed, and yada, 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 all things we know only too well, and very little on how we were oppressing one another, very little on how we were internalizing our oppression, very little on how we were in fact contributing to the silencing and oppression of other categories of people at the same time that we were celebrating, this new field identity, Chicano studies, et cetera, et cetera. So none of those knowledge gains and claims ever came easy. Because they were always contested, because always someone who had an interest in keeping them the way they were, and an interest in not exploring other issues that may have had bad implications for a number of people, who were actively working in that field. So it was not an easy moment. It still isn't to this day. But this notion of gender equity and parity certainly in the late 60s was very pronounced, and it was actually the women, the lesbians, Shri Moraga in particular, Dorian Zaldua, that kind of pushed that envelope outside of the field of Chicano studies, the literary realm, and then kind of it became very central and pushed a lot of people to kind of reimagine what we were doing in terms of work in Chicano studies and what the topics and issues we should be exploring and prioritizing. And so, but those things are never easy to negotiate and navigate.
And so, I guess pushing for those fields, did you receive any obstacles or any disagreements from your peers, or?
Oh, there were huge cheap scenes. I mean, throughout. I mean, you're a graduate student. I mean, you're up for debate. You're up for contestation. You're up for struggling over ideas and stuff. And so that debate was fierce and heartfelt and very political and very personal. And so I think a lot of people were challenged, were criticized, and rightfully so, and we needed to kind of push beyond where we were at that time. But I think more so then than now, the resistance to moving into other areas was a treacherous one, because we wanted to kind of protect the small gains that we were making. We did not want to put too many things on the table that might make us, kind of reimagine or rethink the kind of work we were doing, particularly the critical self-inquiry around our own internal kinds of messiness and whether it's class, generational, gender, sexuality, whatever. All of these things were lines of difference that we, eventually acknowledged, but were quite, careful to not overemphasize and lead to this sense of division and fractiousness and divides that we wanted to do good public relations work. That's what we wanted to do. And as I tell my students now, I could give a damn about public relations work. And so anybody that wants to do work on Latinos and wants to rectify a bad image or put a good image forward, I keep thinking it's silly and ridiculous. We just got to call it the way it is and talk about the messiness of our situation and the contradictions and complexity of it and all of its manifestations, in order to understand and be as clear-headed about what we're facing and then what we might want to try to do about it. And so those are never easy questions, and they're never easy answers. But I've been committed just about my entire career to pushing the envelope and clarifying those the best way we can.
And you said that it was also a personal obstacle. How so was it personal?
Well, I think that, many of the men from that period got viciously criticized, and rightfully so, for our academic work, our politics, our personal politics, our lack of support for women's issues, and other things like that. And that fell on me in the same way it fell on everybody. Where I was a little bit different is that I was married and had kids at the time. I eventually came out, and that moment, I think, kind of signaled to me kind of stepping out of the box and looking at things in a very different way, and in a way that was not as well embraced and supported as it perhaps is now. So, pushing a political agenda, pushing an intellectual, academic agenda, also carried with it pushing a kind of personal investment in advocating and being in some ways a spokesperson for those kinds of issues. And that doesn't come easily. It also comes with contestation. It comes with resistance. It comes with personal attacks and these kinds of things. And so, but I was pretty tough. I can weather those things. It didn't bother me. I'm used to that, and I'm pretty thick-skinned. And I was really successful and really resourceful at what I was doing. And so that protected me in many ways, because if I was just a hack at just doing political work and not doing academic work and it was superficial, I would be open to criticism. But I take great pride in the quality of the work that I do and the rigor of what I was attempted to do from the very beginning and what I'm doing now. And so I have this kind of fierce, attitude towards academic work. Why? Because I think that academic work is not just ivory tower kind of silliness. I think that it's absolutely on the ground. It's a form of political practice in many ways, in a very literal sense. And so I don't approach classes or what I do in advising people on thesis committees and stuff simply to, for professionalization and getting ahead, but, to impart a kind of a critical understanding of the world and our place in it, and with a sense of not only that, but, how we might change it, obviously, because that's obviously the deep investment. So, if I step back, I could think like, okay, I'm from a generation that came of age in the late 60s, early 70s, where we opened the doors. I always tell my students, I'm part of that first generation that came to campus that pried open the college classroom door. And I've spent 40 years keeping that door open, inviting people in. and presenting a different kind of classroom setting with a different topic and a different set of ways of understanding, history or sociology or whatever it might be that I'm teaching, with an eye not just to be critically aware of the realities of how these systems of inequality work, but with some hope that people will do something about them. And I'd like to think that in my own very modest, very small scale way, I've been part of a front of a political battle for 40 years. I take what I do incredibly seriously. Not that I take myself personally all that seriously, but I think that the kind of work and the politics that are invested in that are profound. And so, as people might say, I am deadly serious about what I do, and I insist that students are also deadly serious about what they do.
I know that you were at one point the Dean of Ethnic Studies.
Mm-hmm.
Did you face any obstacles as the Dean of Ethnic Studies?
Of course, ethnic politics. Are you crazy? I mean, yeah. Ethnic politics. When I came into this university, Latino studies and American Indian studies were the smaller units. The big units were Africana and Asian American. And I looked at that and I kept thinking, like, wait a minute. Asians, maybe 8 to 10% of the population. Blacks, like 4%. Latinos, 40%. Wait a minute. And they're getting all the positions and all the money, and we're not getting squat. And there's no Native American faculty. So when I came in, I built those programs up. They have since gone down, particularly Latino studies. I took money away from the programs that were doing quite well to equalize the playing field. What do you think that unleashes? Came after me, and that's okay. I was no long-termer. But I'll tell you one thing. In the 4 years that I was here, I hired 40% of the faculty, and I completely transformed this place from what it was to what it now is. I think a fairly sophisticated, meritorious kind of set of programs at a college that has some distinction. And so, yeah. But, I came in to change the world. I came in, to right some wrongs and to push this place in a new direction. And I wasn't going to do it for 20 years. I did it for 4 years, and I was incredibly successful at what I did. And that success came with political turmoil and differences of opinion and political strife. What's new? I've been involved in political strife for 40 years, so it was no big deal to me, And I don't take it completely personal, it's just politics. And I've been friends with people who I've been political enemies with, for years. And so it wasn't that big a deal ultimately. But I brought the same seriousness and conviction and critical lens to what I was doing. Some of the things that are part of the college now were not part of the college. We have race and resistance studies, the comparative unit. We actually taught courses on whiteness, on Pacific Islanders, that were mixed race people, gay, lesbian stuff. We're putting together a queer ethnic studies minor in place now, and stuff that I've had a hand in and stuff. And so this world is very different from what it was, when I got here in 2000, in the last 17 years. And I'll take some credit for being transformative about that at a personal cost. But that's okay, just politics. And so, and I could have gone on, I could have gone back to Michigan or somewhere else. I stayed, to teach the last few years of my career and to try to nurture and support what I had helped to transform. And so, yeah, I take some solace and comfort in knowing that I made a difference, in my own kind of modest and small ways. But I came here for a reason, and I succeeded at doing that. And I leave with some feeling of accomplishment despite that political turmoil. That's politics. What can I tell you? What else can I tell you?
So I guess reflecting on like all your work, whether it was Berkeley or Michigan or here at SF State, what do you feel was your greatest moment, or like a couple of moments, whether it was being the dean or teaching certain classes?
It wasn't being the dean. It wasn't teaching classes. I think that my fondest moments, that's a really good question, and I hate to be really honest with you, but I will be, was being in Berkeley. I mean, when I went there in the 70s and in the 80s, and then went to Stanford on a postdoc and went back and taught at Berkeley. You know, that was my book came out shortly there. I mean, that was a thriving intellectual moment, and I was kind of at the top of my game at that point, and I had worked with a number of graduate students. I trained a number of people. I can rattle off 10 people and 10 books that I chaired dissertations and stuff, and so that's when I had the sense, like, and at Michigan as well, I was training people. People were getting PhDs under my direction. They were doing great work, and they were going on and teaching. So I was kind of spawning these things in a way that was really vibrant, because half of my teaching was in the doctoral program.
Then for me, more of a personal question. You said you were married and you had kids, and eventually you came out. How was it being in the closet and going through all that? And then do you have any advice for people that go through the same thing as you do?
Advice. Oh God, that was painful. That was really painful, because it was so marked and stigmatized at the time, and to come out and be vulnerable like that and be dismissed, because I'd heard for 20 years what all the men were saying about queers and lesbians and stuff, and so I was part of that world. I heard that, so I knew damn well what was going to come down the path. So that was painful, but I had the resolve to do that, and I think coming out to my kids when they were 8 and 10 was a difficult thing for me, and we wept, and it was okay, and still relatively okay with them and with me, but that was hard, and so I don't know whether anyone goes through any kind of identity transformations in an easy way. I can't imagine anyone does. Do I have any advice for people? I don't know, other than, be true to yourself. I mean, follow your vision of what you want to be and what you want to do. Stay true to that, and don't be mediocre at it. Be fierce, make a difference. Don't just be one of the people along the path, chart that path, and whether it's a straight or a treacle path that I took, and so like whatever path that is, make that a great pathway. So so I don't have kind of personal advice for people. I'd like to think and hope that all of the work that people have done, around gay and lesbian issues in particular in the last 15 or 20 years has made it so much easier for people now, because there's readings, there's nothing that that they can't find out about, they can't read about, and I use a lot of these things in some of my classes and stuff, and so I think that makes it a little easier, because there's materials, there's support, and there's people, organizations, and so I think that's probably, the important thing that I would just say, is people just have to be true to themselves and to what who they think and feel that they are, and if that's, being a gay man or being a lesbian or being whatever, just be the best queer you could possibly be, and kick some ass on that path.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed our video. Here are some things that we learned as a group. Well, for me, I learned, I had no idea that he was part of the criminal system, and look at him, he is a professor and he has excelled in so much. But that's something that I learned. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then for me, I guess it was surprising just hearing his whole growing up, like how he grew up, his family dynamic, fact that he has 8 siblings and his parents were farm workers. It was just very enlightening to hear about his family.
Yeah, same. Just like my colleagues, I have him as a professor right now. Like I've said, during his class, he would talk about his struggles growing up and stuff. But during this interview, like he went more in depth about his struggles and just thinking about everything he went through, and then he still became a successful professor and publisher and stuff. Like everything like that, like really inspires people to like, and inspires me as well to like kind of just move forward in college and like succeed in life.
Well, and also just in addition to things that we've learned, there was also, I guess, some sort of critiques as
Yeah.
well. One of them, I guess, would be his negative attitude towards students now. I thought that was kind of like a little disheartening, how he thinks a lot of us are not really, we're not giving our full effort into our studies.
Yeah, for sure. Going into the interview, I wasn't expecting him to have that sort of attitude, and towards the middle of the interview, he kind of just ranted on about his personal opinions of students, and it kind of just threw us off towards the end of the video, and the questions we were going to ask him also.
Yeah, like just like them, like it kind of like threw me off, and it kind of disappointed me a little bit during the interview because I wasn't really expecting him to go that in depth with like ranting about students and how he prefers teaching other schools compared to here. Like I said, it really threw us off. More of my colleagues, because like they don't know how he is, his attitudes and stuff like that. I personally know a little bit more about his attitudes towards this, but for them it was really hard for them to actually go through it and listen to it and like go through this interview and actually listening at all this.
I was shook.
Yeah.
I was shook. Alright, well, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.
Alright, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Subscribe.